Mara first saw the glimmer on the horizon at noon, when the sun reached that cruel height from which it burned color out of everything. Until that moment, the dust wastes had behaved exactly as maps promised. Mile after mile of cracked shale, beige dunes, and the occasional stump of rebar that marked cities long since flinched to skeletons. Then, in the distance, something winked, metal catching light, or perhaps light inventing metal out of mirage. Her camel bird, a rangy, cobalt-feathered drifter named Scrip, paused atop a dune and shook grit from its gullet. Mara raised a brass spyglass. Across the quivering air, she glimpsed petals that were not petals at all, but slivers of bright alloy, nested like articulated knives. They bobbed in an unfelt wind, hundreds of them, laid out in rows too perfect for chance. Above them, glinting motes flitted in purposeful loops. Clockwork bees, Mara whispered. Stories had reached the coasts about such marvels. Most folk laughed. Clockwork bees pollinating steel flowers on dead ground. Childish fancy, fit for lullabies. But the envoy from the inland guilds had insisted the tales were true, and that the flowers gave not nectar but gears, tiny and flawless, each stamped with a maker's glyph no living smith could reproduce. Those gears supposedly powered automatons, water pumps, even entire district grids. Mara had heard that men killed for so much as a palmful. She lowered the spyglass and ran a gloved hand over Scrip's neck. Easy. We're only looking. The creature snorted skepticism. They began the descent. The air grew colder rather than hotter, as though some unseen current leaked from cracks beneath the sand. When they reached the edge of the metal field, Mara decided it was no natural meadow. She dismounted and crouched. Sand gave way to plates of brushed steel, thin and flexible like leaves. She pried one up and found a meshwork of riveted stems, rooting each sheet into bedrock. The stems pulsed faintly, as if bloodless hearts beat inside. Mara stepped between rows. The flowers stood at her shoulder, blossoms opening and closing with a soft clack. The motion was not synchronized. Each bloom followed its own schedule, and yet the aggregate effect was rhythmic enough to calm something restless inside her. It felt like breathing. A whirring buzz passed her ear. She flinched, but stayed her reflexive swat. The bee, a beetle-bodied mechanism with brass wings trimmed in mica, hovered inches from her face. Multifaceted crystal eyes inspected her, lenses ratcheting. Satisfied, it darted to a nearby blossom whose petals were still unfurling. The bee lowered a filigreed proboscis into the flower's core. Instead of collecting liquid, the insect deposited something, a mote-like fragment that clicked into place among many gears already nested there. When the bee withdrew, the petals sealed. Moments later, the stem quivered. The bloom bent toward its neighbor, and suddenly ejected from its base a cluster of thumbnail-sized cogs that tinkled onto the plating below. Another bee zipped down, scooped the cogs into a pillared abdomen, and hurried off toward a distant structure that Mara only now noticed. A hive, or a forge. Maybe both. Mara sank onto her haunches, an ecosystem made wholly from motive parts. Pollination here did not pass genes, but designs. The bees were both couriers and midwives of pattern. The flowers bore gears instead of seeds, gears that the hive likely used to fabricate new bees, which would then propagate more flowers, the perfect closed loop, and all of it thriving on land where nothing organic could last. She found herself smiling. The wastes had always seemed a punishment, Earth's long, dull sigh after humans spent their birthright. But perhaps life, mechanical life, had not given up on invention. She touched a fallen gear. It was warm, not with solar heat, but with the low throb of stored energy. as though the gear knew it would soon slot into some greater machine. When she released it, the gear rolled toward the stem from which it had dropped, found an aperture, and nestled home. The flower straightened by several millimeters, sharper now, more defined. Self-maintenance, she realized. Nothing wasted. "Fine day for a stroll," a voice called. Mara spun, knife drawn. From behind a bank of silver thistle emerged a man in a leather duster, patched with circuit diagrams. His right arm ended in a socket where a forearm should have been. From the socket extended a claw that hissed with pneumatic adjustment. "Put that away," he said, eyeing her blade. "If the bees think you mean harm, they'll weld your eyelids shut." She hesitated, then sheathed the knife. "Didn't think anyone lived out here." "They don't." "Only me." He removed a battered hat. "Name's Rylan. Careful where you step." Mara scanned the ground. Between plates lay nodules like chrome fungi. Steam hissed from tiny holes at their tips. Vents, she guessed. Correct. The meadow breathes. Exhales hot enough to blister. Inhales cold enough to freeze. Time your stride. "Why warn me?" "I prefer fellow trespassers alive. Harder to talk with corpses." He motioned toward a line of ducts shaped like cattails. "Come. I'll show you the foundry. Then we'll decide whether to kill each other." Mara weighed her options. She had water for 2 more days and enough jerky for 3. The steel meadow might stretch further than her maps could tell, and curiosity was wolfing her discipline. "Lead on." They picked a cautious route, stepping only on ridged plates that did not pulse. Rylan explained the few rules he'd learned. If a flower's petals flutter, give it birth. It is in birth labor, and the discharge can slice skin. Do not touch the bees, they remember. And if one hears a deep gong in the soil, lie flat. The meadow occasionally reconfigures. The foundry stood at the center like a petrified heart. A cone of braided iron root rose 30 feet, riddled with entrances, shaped exactly to the bees' silhouettes. Some apertures were large enough for humans. Inside, the air smelled of burned cedar and engine oil. Gears crawled along conveyor tendrils, sorting themselves by size and tooth count. Where the tendrils converged, they fed into vats of mercury-bright fluid that sparked with blue arcs. As a bee approached, the vats extruded skeletal limbs, plating, wing cores, even the translucent hexes of eyes. The components snapped together mid-air, animated by some magnetism Mara did not understand. Within seconds, a newborn bee zipped free, guidance fins unfurling. "It births itself," she breathed. "Each vat holds a template that changes over time," Rylan said. "Genetic drift, but for alloy." "How long have you studied this?" "Long enough to know I can never own it," he replied, "which means a syndicate will soon come to claim it." Mara frowned. "Have they found it?" "Not yet, but they will. Sensors along the dust road already prickle with rumor." She turned, trying to see him in the low light. "You want me to help stop them?" Rylan laughed, a dry cough. "One scavenger and one hermit against the guilds? Hardly. I want a witness, someone to tell me I'm not mad for trying." Before Mara could answer, a tremor passed through the cone. Gears halted mid-journey. The vats went dark. The bees, both fledgling and veteran, froze where they hovered, wings locked. "Gong," Rylan whispered. He grabbed Mara's wrist and pulled her flat against the wall. A sonorous thud rolled through the air, as if deep below a beast had struck an anvil. Outside, metal screamed. The foundry tilted 3 degrees. Dust fell like silver snow. Then everything stilled. The bees resumed. The vats glowed. The world exhaled. Mara swallowed. Was that the meadow reconfiguring? "An aneurysm," Rylan said. "The system adjusts flow."
No pattern I can discern, only that it grows more frequent. Something's missing. He gestured toward his absent forearm. I lost this 2 seasons ago. Tried to free a jammed conveyor. It ate 40 pounds of flesh and bone before I cut my own elbow. Mara winced. Why stay after that? Because it's alive. Look at them. He pointed at a trio of bees weaving figure eights around a blossom. They don't just follow commands, they improvise. They teach. The older ones haven't always been older. They choose which of them inherits memory. Mara watched, fascinated. The bees at work resembled monks illuminating texts, reverent, exacting, filled with labor's dignity. She felt ashamed for thinking earlier of what price a merchant might pay for a pouch of the gears. As though reading her mind, Ryland said, Do you still carry that idea of plunder? I carry too many ideas, she admitted. Night settled without ceremony. The metallic meadow emitted a soft aurora, pale teal and lilac, drawn from veins that ran beneath the plates. Ryland invited her to camp within the foundry. They built a small fire from stripped wiring. Copper burned green, casting ghost light on their faces. He told his story. Years ago, he had been a siege engineer for the southern provinces, forging automatons that toppled citadels. When the war ended, he wandered, seeking penance. On the waste's fringe, he saw bees of brass pollinating flowers of steel, and felt hope for the first time since the bombarding of Thalassa's libraries. Mara shared her own tale. Born to a floating fishery, apprenticed as a cartographer, she had witnessed coastlines crumble into the sea. Maps became lies, faster than she could ink corrections. So she abandoned human realms and came inland to measure ruins no one cared to claim. Funny, Ryland mused. We fled different sins and found the same miracle. Toward dawn, they were awakened by an alarm shriek, an unfamiliar sound, not generated by any part of the mechanical ecosystem. Mara dashed outside. On the horizon, lights bobbed, hover carriages, a convoy. Spot lamps lanced the dark. The guilds, she said. Ryland groaned. Sooner than expected. Bees surged overhead, unified swarm droning like a cathedral organ. They formed a living shield between the convoy and the meadow, lines 3 rows thick. Yet the vehicles advanced, shrugging sand with magnetic skirts. Mounted on each prow were plasma lances that glowed cobalt. Ryland strode to the meadow's edge, arms raised. "Turn back," he shouted. "You'll break the balance." The lead carriage halted. A hatch hissed and a woman in lacquered armor stepped out. She examined the hovering bees through smoked goggles. "Remarkable," she said. "I am Director Havelock of the 8th Mechanist Guild. By charter of the Accord of Laths, this site is now guild property." Ryland shook his head. "You can't own a being." "Ownership?" Havelock laughed. "We speak of stewardship. The guild will nurture this phenomenon, extract its value, and distribute gains to the realm." Mara felt heat rise in her chest. "You mean harvest until nothing's left?" Havelock glanced at her. "An amateur cartographer, yes? Your guild emblem is stitched on that satchel. You appreciate measurement. So let's measure potential. These gears are perfect, uncorrupted. With them we can repair water networks, resurrect farmland. Are those not noble aims?" Ryland answered. "A noble end pursued by brutal means merely replaces one desolation with another." Havelock sighed. She raised a hand. A technician brought forward a small weapon, a viburo-tuning fork attached to a sonic emitter. "This field communicates by resonance," she explained. "We recorded a reconfiguration pulse and inverted the frequency. At 40 decibels, it should paralyze the entire system, long enough for us to install siphons." Mara's blood ran cold.
The bees sensed threat. They tightened their pattern, but confusion rippled through the formation. Some drifted, colliding with neighbors. Rylan turned to Mara. The meadow is attuned to itself. Perhaps it can defend if we give it a reason. You saw how it absorbed the gear you touched. Offer it something else. Something foreign but compatible. My maps. He nodded. Ink is carbon. Paper is cellulose. No use. But the fabric of your satchel is embedded with threadable circuits, yes? Copper-laced. Why would that help? Conductor path. A gift. Show the meadow that humans can contribute. She hesitated. The satchel held every chart she had drawn these past years. Her memory was good, but not that good. The first plasma lance ignited, scattering bees. Mara shuddered. She slung the satchel off her shoulder, emptied its contents onto the sand, and approached a cluster of flowers trembling at the disturbance. She knelt and laid the satchel among them. "I don't know if you can hear me," she murmured, "but this carries the story of land and sea. If you accept it, remember us as map makers, not thieves." The petals parted. Metallic tendrils slipped out, delicately probing the bag, smelling with sensors. Sparks leapt as circuits aligned. The satchel sank, thread disentangling, copper strands weaving into the roots. A hum resonated across the meadow. Lower than before, older. Every bloom illuminated from within. Lines of light traveling stem to stem, forming a grid that pulsed outwards like sonar. Havelock barked an order. The sonic emitter screamed. Instantly, Mara's teeth vibrated. At the meadow's center, the cone shuddered, as though struck. Bees toppled. Then the plateau on which the convoy stood fissured. Plates rose, twisting into sheer obelisks. Sand liquefied into mercury pools that swallowed treads. Beneath each carriage, stems erupted, wrapping axles, prying pieces loose with surgical grace. One lance fired, but the beam refracted off an unfolding petal the size of a sail, hitting the sky. Havelock tried to retreat. A stem snared her ankle, yanking her to the ground with gentle but non-negotiable strength. Instead of crushing her, it held her above a flower whose petals shaped a cup. In that cup lay a single gear, larger than the others, inscribed with unknown script. The stem guided Havelock's hand to the gear. Trembling, she touched it. The gear glowed and dissolved, wicking up her arm in filaments of light. Her armor fell away. She cried out, but not from pain. From something else. Vision, maybe. Gears unfurled across her shoulder like epaulets, then vanished beneath her skin. When the stem released her, Havelock remained kneeling, eyes wide with newborn comprehension. The meadow subsided. Bees regained flight, though their formation was no longer defensive. It was celebratory, swirling around every survivor, scavenger, hermit, guildswoman, dropping motes of violet luminescence that clung like dew. Mara approached cautiously. "Director, are you?" Havelock rose, voice hushed. "I thought only of extraction, but it showed me integration. We tried to seize a kingdom. Instead, we found a citizenship." She faced Rylan. "The Guild's claim is revoked. This place governs itself. We can choose to cooperate, or we can leave." Rylan arched a brow. "And your convoy?" "Those who accept may stay as students." She swept her gaze over her stunned crew. "Those who refuse must depart unarmed." There was grumbling, fear, awe. In time, most chose to remain, disarming the lances, dismantling the emitter, handing components to the meadow which absorbed them like vitamins. Weeks passed. Mara recorded all she witnessed, though now her records were etched onto thin plates gifted by the flowers. Plates that stored data in magnetic spin, such that a library could fit in a pocket. She learned the meadow owned cycles.
At dawn, it harvested solar heat through dark petals that folded by noon. At midday, it transferred excess energy to subterranean reservoirs that ran turbines, driving the breath vents Rylan had named. At dusk, it produced surplus gears, which bees carried to outer rings where new flowers sprouted, pushing back the barren waste foot by foot. She learned that the cone foundry was merely the queen of many queens, and beneath every queen, the land hollowed into spiral warrens that resembled roots, yet served as archives of design. One day, while charting a newly grown sector, Mara spotted a familiar shape emerging from sutured sand, the copper of her old satchel, reforged into a pillar, engraved with images. She knelt, tracing lines that depicted coastlines she had mapped, oceans she had crossed. Below them were additions, sketches of gear blossoms, bee anatomies, resonance spectrums, her studies since arrival. "They remember us," she said. Rylan stood beside her, the claw of his prosthetic now replaced with a fluidic hand, grown by the foundry according to his neural signature. He flexed titanium fingers. "Remember and improve." Beyond the sector, a new grove unfurled, petals edged with copper, circuits braided through steel veins. Bees there bore wings, tinted the blue of Scrip's feathers, a color the meadow had never before displayed. Mara realized what the ecosystem had been missing when the aneurysms began. Novelty. It had reached the limits of self-referential evolution, craving an outside pattern to catalyze further change. Humans had provided that pattern, but not through conquest, through willingness to exchange. Her satchel's conductive threads had given the meadow a new logic gate. The guild's sonic design, once inverted and nested, became a communication sublayer that allowed flora and fauna to coordinate over larger distances without the dangerous gong resets. The land was no longer barren. Water condensed each night along the petals' cooling fins and funneled into cisterns. Microsprings appeared where turbines drilled. Already tufts of stubborn moss crept along seams, the first organic passenger species returning to the wastes. On the 40th dawn since the guild's arrival, Mara climbed a scaffold grown from interlocking stems. From the summit she saw, far off, the faint silhouettes of other wastelands, gray horizons awaiting translation into living alloy. She knew missionaries of this new symbiosis would venture there, carrying seeds that were not seeds but gear diagrams, accompanied by bees who now stored within their chassis both pollen codes and human stories. Rylan joined her, a bee perched on his shoulder like a brooch. "You still plan to map the world?" Mara nodded. "But the legend will be different. No longer lines of dominion. I'll chart relationships. What feeds what? Who teaches whom? An atlas of reciprocity." He smiled. "Then take this." He handed her a gear the size of her thumb, copper inlaid with glass. "Insert it into your compass." She pressed it against the device she kept clipped at her belt. The gear melted into the housing. The needle, once magnetized to north, now spun and settled toward the flower field. A new cardinal point. "It will always orient you toward equilibrium," Rylan said. "May your maps remember balance." Below them, clockwork bees droned through morning light, brushing their metal bodies against steel petals. Petals shivered, released fresh gears that tinkled like rain. The sound echoed across miles, a chorus of industry, indistinguishable from joy. Mara inhaled air scented faintly of ozone and iron blossoms. She wondered what name future generations would give this place: forge garden, cog prairie, the bloom of machines, but then relinquished the thought. Names were human seams. The meadow sang past language. Still, as she and Rylan descended to begin another day's tending, she felt the urge to whisper gratitude. and did so in the only tongue she trusted. The hush between footfalls, the deliberate placement of each boot on living metal. Respectful, alert, in love with the miracle of a world that chose to begin again. Gear by gear, wing by wing, map by ever-widening map.